Yeah. I'm John Austin. I'm an alcoholic, and I almost started crying before this thing started. Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful. I've got a sobriety date of July 2nd, 2022, and I'm certain, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that I did not do that I have not maintained this sobriety, because I'm about to tell you some stories, and we'll be able to attest after the fact, like, I could not have done this on my own. And all the glory goes to God. It just has to. There's no other explanation but that. So tonight's actually a good night to do this because, ironically, the first time I ever got drunk was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So 'tis the season. I had a cousin come to town. I think it was 13 or 14 years old. Cousin came to town who's probably got the same disease. And we all walked to a convenience store, got a bunch of beer, came back, drank, and I laughed and had the best time. And the next day, I puked up all that turkey and dressing with a smile on my face because I had just discovered the magic elixir that was going to fix me. So I had this great childhood. I grew up in a small town. I grew up in Ozona. We rode bikes all over town. I never had any issues with my parents. They were loving parents. I had a little brother who looked up to me. I had great friends. All the things that you would have thought made a kid happy, and I was just an odd duck. Fortunately, I've grown out of that. But I was timid, as Kenny would say. I was shy. I never really felt like I fit in. There was a lot of ranching families in Ozona, and we weren't one of those. And if you weren't a rancher, your kind of claim to fame in a small town was whether or not you could play football, and I couldn't do that either. And so that it never really helped with the girl situation. And when I got drunk that first time, and I felt my personality change, and I felt all of a sudden gregarious and brave and all these things that I wanted to be and confident, my life changed. So I used that from then on to overcome all these things that I didn't really like about myself. It was a way to become somebody different. And looking back, and I've had a lot of time to look back in the last year and a half, there's other things that I would do, whether it be dive headfirst into a relationship, or even I was into theater in high school. I was like the only weird kid that liked theater. But I think I liked theater for the same reason I like drinking, because I got to be somebody else. I didn't have to be me. So my high school career was probably like most people's high school careers. Just we drank, drove around way too much, chased girls, partied. But there was a difference in the way I drank, and it's taken me 41 years to realize this, in the way that my friends were drinking. And the difference was, when I got drunk, I got real destructive. I didn't at the time think I was mad at anything, but every time you get drunk, you decide to push over porta potties or stop signs or steal shit from people's houses. I mean, it starts to add up as maybe some resentment that's deep down in there. And I got to go to jail several times for that to boot. And I kind of did the same thing in college. And in college, I really kind of thought, from that point on, I was making excuses as to why I was not an alcoholic, like trying to disqualify myself from being an alcoholic. But in college, we would get blackout drunk Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but I didn't drink Sunday through Wednesday, so I was in the clear. We would make horrible decisions that all college kids do, and I think my family was probably concerned, but they were more concerned probably about my mental health, because it had already started. I was sick at that point, and I was drinking to overcome, just like I had when I was in high school, or even junior high before that. I was drinking to become somebody else. They were concerned about my mental health. I think they figured that I would grow out of the drinking otherwise. I struggled to get through school. I had a hard time staying stable emotionally and mentally. If everything was going right and I had the girlfriend and I had all the things that validated me on the inside, then I'd go, I'd have a great semester. I'd have a 4.0. And then the next semester, something happened, I'd get dumped and I'd have a 0.0. And it was like that. And it took me 6 years to graduate, and I just couldn't figure it out. I watched all these other people drink like I drank, And they just seemed to be happy. They were doing all the things you're supposed to do in college. They're partying and having fun and going to class, and I just couldn't get it. And I didn't know at all at that time that the two things were related. So when I went back to grad school, how I got in, I don't know. I realized that there was a regimen that would work for me. And it wasn't the blacking out on the weekends, but it was drinking every night to chill out. Every night. And I would drink, not a ton, but 3 or 4 beers to start out, have a girlfriend, voila, I'm stable. It's the medicine that I've always looked for. And prior to that, my parents had sent me to a psychologist and therapist, and therapist told me I needed to get a girlfriend. And I was like, I'm trying. I'm trying. But that regimen worked for me. And it worked for me from about the time I was 25 till about the time I was 35. Now, I look back, and things weren't as rosy as I obviously pictured them at the time, but I was able, while doing that, to get out of school, to get a good job, to start a family, have 2 kids, and for the most part, kind of keep my shit together. Now, on the inside, I was dying. I was miserable. I've heard somebody in here say it before. I'd be on Christmas Day sitting there with my kids as they're opening presents and wish I was somewhere else. The older I got, the more involved I got in my family, where we should have been taking kids to soccer practice and everything else, the more I kind of pushed that stuff away, and the more I leaned on going home and drinking. And I was in a job where it was a requirement that I'd go out and be in the public and go to things at night where people were having cocktails, and I could force myself to have one there, only to go home and drink a 12-pack to chill out from that. So obviously I'm not headed in the right direction at this point. It's kind of what Gabe alluded to. Like, that's about the time that he and I had met. Like, it wasn't having any substantial impact on my life outwardly. I hadn't lost any job. I wasn't in trouble with the law anymore. My marriage I thought was pretty decent. But it just got slipperier and slipperier. So I'm married and at the time, and I'm thinking, maybe this marriage is not perfect, but, there's something about it that's not right. We went through stuff that not every, but a lot of couples go through: infidelity, getting the cops called on us because we get in this big fight. And I thought it was related to me being sick, and I didn't see the correlation between that and drinking. And it would happen, of course, every time we were drunk. Every time was when this stuff would happen. Fast forward a little while after all that stuff, we've kind of gotten through it. My drink has not gotten any better. I'm staying drunk pretty much all weekend. And COVID happens. And I'm at home with my 2 kids. I got 2 little girls, Hud and Grace, and my wife. And at that point, my wife and I did not have any sort of relationship. We hated each other. And so being stuck in the house together, what I would do to cope is just drink all day. And I would do some amazing stuff drunk. Like, I was in this role at the Concho Valley Council of Governments where we did a lot of emergency preparedness, emergency recovery stuff. And we'd send water all over town. Of course, I'm sitting on my couch drinking, but send water all over town and send buses to pick up people so they could go to dialysis in Big Spring and do all this stuff. And I'm barking orders, and I'm thinking, this is great. Like, I love this. COVID's fantastic. But when it was over, and I've read about Blitzkrieg in Europe, and not to get too into a history lesson here, but during World War II, the Germans would bomb London every night. And when that was going on, you've heard the term the British stiff upper lip, that mentality. During the middle of all that, they would go into the subways at night and they'd party and they would, hang out, and then they'd go to work all day. And for the most part, they were listening to Winston Churchill on the radio, and for the most part, they were pretty good emotionally. And then when it stopped, they all fell apart. And that kind of happened to me after COVID. Like, I was fine with the adrenaline of COVID and having playing a role, and then when it was over, like, I had all of a sudden no purpose anymore. I was a full-blown alcoholic at that point. My wife and I got divorced. I was happy about that at the time, but all it really did was free me up to do whatever the hell I wanted to do when I didn't have my kids. And I remember distinctly the first Saturday morning that I was staying, we would switch so the girls wouldn't have to move. So my parents have a place, so I'd go to my parents' house and stay there for a week, and then I'd go home for a week and vice versa. And I distinctly remember being there Saturday morning one time and thinking like, oh my God, I can drink all day long. And I did. And I stayed drunk all day Saturday, never get off the couch, do the same thing on Sunday. The other thing that I liked to do at that time, because somebody had told me at the time, like, man, you're going to be eligible bachelor in town, like, you finally get rid of your wife. And I believed it. I believed it. And so if you were a recent divorcee at that time in San Angelo, my apologies, because I probably reached out to you on either Facebook or Instagram. And I didn't have a great success rate, but, you text 5 people, you get a response from one. I also, about that time, really just decided I was about to turn 40. I'd done what I was supposed to do up to that point. I'd never tried drugs. I'd smoked weed twice. I'd smoked weed twice in college and worried it was going to ruin my political career. I got in a fist fight with my brother because he smoked weed and I found out about it. And I told him that he was going to ruin his career. I found out he had done coke one time at a point, and oh my God. So when I'm 38, I decided now's my turn. So if, my apologies if I was around you 3 or 4 years ago when I was going through my divorce and you had cocaine or Molly on you, like, I was probably bumming it. And I just was, what I thought was just kind of living the dream. At the time, too, work started to slip. Like, you can't maintain that, show up to work. I dwindled it down to, and I mean, they had hired me 10 years ago to run this place, and I dwindled my work week down to about 2 days. I was too hungover Monday. I'd kind of taper off, drink only 8 beers on Monday night, feel a little bit better on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I was pretty productive because I was finally not hungover because I'd only drank 6 beers the night before. And I had one fantastic day, and then Thursday, I just let it rip all over again. So people were starting to notice that. The breakups of the girls that I was dating at the time got harder and harder because I was already becoming codependent with them. I was dating girls, trying to find girls that I thought would save me. I remember telling my ex-wife at some point during there, I'm like, who the hell is going to save me from me? Which is, ironic. Like, nobody was going to save me from me. I had to save me from me, and I couldn't do it. But I kept trying. I kept trying all the while thinking it was okay to, like, just go out of my mind, party, do whatever I wanted to do. And it all kind of came to a head. I finally met a girl that didn't drink. And when she didn't drink and I was juxtaposed against that, I realized, holy shit, this has gotten out of control. This isn't like my friends. Like, I can't not drink. I can't get in bed without having a scotch. Like, I can't go to anything social and be around other people without being so agitated that I'm not just dying to get out of there to have a drink. And moreover, like, that was my only coping mechanism. So anything that I had to do that was hard throughout the day, whether it was a tough meeting or whether it was fire somebody, anything, I would only get through that based on the fact that I only had to make it another 5 hours to drink. And then not feel like that was a problem because I'd only drink 6 beers. Like, it's fine. So I start dating this girl. She doesn't drink. I start realizing I have a huge problem, and I start thinking, I'm going to quit. By the time I'm not an alcoholic, but I've got a drinking problem, and I'm going to quit by the time I'm 40. It all came to a roaring head on July 1st, 2022. Now, I told you all that about my prior life. One of the things that I didn't tell you about is my whole life I've had issues with depression and anxiety. And anytime something bad had happened, and 99% of the time it was about a girl, I'd have these horrible suicidal ideations. So I thought about it since I was a kid. I idolized guys like Ernest Hemingway because I thought it was romantic. I had a friend in college that shot himself with a shotgun and killed himself, and I remember thinking, like, how courageous is it that he was able to go through with that? So I've always had that in the back of my head. And there had been a few things that had happened since I'd gotten divorced that had kind of pushed me pretty close. I got in a fight with my brother. I shot a hole through my bathroom door with a Glock, but nothing really hurt as bad as losing these girls. And so this girl that I thought was sober and was the answer to all my prayers, 6 months in, it had already gotten toxic, in large part because of my drinking, but also just because it was toxic, and we both kind of met each other in the same way Gabe and I met each other. We were both these broken souls and thinking, well, no one else is going to love me unless they've been through what I've been through. No one else is going to love me unless they've seen hell like I've seen hell. So we break up. We get in a fight on July 1st over something stupid like me not disciplining my kid. And we break up. I broke up with her because prior to that she had broken up with me about 4 or 5 times, and I was just going to beat her to the punch that night. And things were great. So I went back to what I knew. I don't think I had any hard drugs on me that night, but at the time I also had a lot of Klonopin, a lot of benzos that the doctors had prescribed. I should also mention that a lot of my drinking buddies back in the day are doctors, and so I was going to everyone that I could. And so I had benzos to get through the day, and I had Ambien to sleep at night. But I went back to exactly what I'd always done. I got on this phone and I started texting every single girl I could think to, and something just didn't hit right that night. I knew while it was all going down, and I was not that drunk, but I knew that I was at the jumping off point. I knew that I couldn't on my own stop drinking. I knew that at that point, like, I was in jeopardy of losing my kids because of the things that I've been driving around with them drunk, that my ex-wife was not fully aware of, but the times that I would just be absolutely plowed in front of my kids, like falling on the floor drunk. I was about to skip work for the upteenth time, probably the 30th time, in that year, and I said I just can't do it anymore. And so my old friend, the suicidal ideation popped up, and I thought, that's the answer. So I took a half a bottle of Klonopin, which is a lot, and a half a bottle of Ambien, and thought, I'm either going to wake up in 4 or 5 days or I'm going to die. I don't care. And I sat there with that for about 15 minutes, and I thought, oh shit, what did I do? So I called a friend that would answer the phone and had always answered the phone, and I told her I just took a bunch of pills. I've got sleep apnea, so I had a CPAP. I was it's like this. I'm hospitalizing myself. Gonna put some oxygen in. So I put my CPAP on. This is probably the first person in history to try to commit suicide and put their CPAP on, just in case. So I got my CPAP on. My friend shows up to get me, and I'm out. I'm gone, and I don't come to until probably a day and a half later, and I'm in Shannon Behavioral. And I knew about Shannon Behavioral. I had friends that had gone to Shannon Behavioral for psychosis. I had visited them in there, and I referred to it lovingly like I was never ever going to wind up in there, like the Puzzle Factory. I saw a kid in there one time, and he was putting a puzzle together, and there was a piece missing. I said, what happened to that piece? He said, I don't know, someone ate it. So to wake up there was shocked. Even though in the back of my head I kind of knew I'd punched a one-way ticket that was either going to take me to the hospital or to the grave, I just didn't think through the Shannon Behavioral part of that, I guess. So not so long after that, I start getting phone calls from family members that I hadn't talked to in a while, and my cousin lets it slip that my family's wanting me to go to rehab, and I thought, rehab? I'm not an alcoholic. I've got some bad mental health issues, but I'm not an alcoholic. And then the doctor came, and she looked back at the liver function test from the last 3 or 4 years, and it was not good. But I had there's a ratio of ALT to AST, and there's a way to tell whether it's alcohol induced or not by that ratio. And so I'd always go in and tell my doctor, this is the way I eat. This is not because of this ratio. This ratio is incorrect. And he's like, yeah, I've seen you in action. I'm pretty sure it's that. So she had looked at that and she said, you're going to die of cirrhosis. Like, you need to get help. And at the time, I think what clicked with me was, because I was, I joked about that suicide attempt, but in all seriousness, like, it's the scariest I've ever been. And the thought that I had gotten that far with it and almost done that to my 2 little girls, who are now 11 and 8, was sickening to me. And so I became willing to go to rehab because I thought, well, maybe if I don't drink, I won't try to kill myself. And so on the way down there, I'm with my dad and my brother, and I specifically asked for a rehab that didn't offer AA or the 12 steps. Because that shit doesn't work. I tried smart recovery somehow. I thought that was better at that point. I also, prior to that, had gotten from a doctor some naltrexone, and I loved it because you could drink as much as you want and never get drunk. So I knew I had a problem, but I still didn't think I was an alcoholic. But I thought, if it's going to keep me from trying to kill myself, great, let's do it. I also said on the way down there, if this is a church camp, keep your phone on, because I'm getting out of here as soon as I can. And my poor dad is sitting there, feeling like he just almost lost me to suicide, and I'm bitching how to be in a church camp. Well, it was a church camp. Only people say the F word a lot. But I slowly started to, based on my step one, and it was flawed, but my surrender was, I can't drink or I'm going to kill myself. And that opened the door for me to explore this a little bit more, to be open-minded about the fact that maybe AA did work. It didn't hurt that Chris Raymer's there telling me. As funny as he was, and so I started opening my eyes to something. Nothing happened at that time. Now, I went to church every Sunday growing up. I would sit there in the pews and watch people pray and think, like, what the hell are they doing? Like, as I got older, I was kind of jealous of it. Like, something must be going on over there, but I don't get it. So I took an intellectual approach. I decided that my church was the problem. Of course, everything else is the problem. Someone else's problem, someone else's fault. I'd grown up Methodist. That was the issue. So I decided I'm going to become an Episcopalian. Y'all know what the nickname for Episcopalians is, right? Whiskey-palians. Hey, that's a coincidence that I went to a church that encouraged drinking. So that was the problem. So I decided I'm becoming an Episcopalian, and I dive in. And at this point, I'm so sick and so miserable that I'm really looking for God. And I read books, and I start reading on Christian universalism because I have issues with how some people could make it and some people who are on the other side of the globe who had never had any exposure to God couldn't. And I'm going to outsmart it, just like I tried to do everything else at that point in my life. And it wasn't until I was in rehab, and it was a tiny thing. There was a guy there from St. Angelo that I knew, and he had been like a big brother to me back home, even in my active addiction, even before he really even was aware, and I didn't know that he had a problem, and he was there at the same time. And I thought, that seems, now it doesn't seem like that big of a coincidence. That's where a lot of people from St. Angelo go. But at the time, I thought there's no way that that's anything other than God. Not if I go to church, if I serve on this committee, that committee, not if I put my kids in church, not if I sing loud enough. But there's no, in my mind, there was a shift. like a spiritual awakening. Like, there's no way that would have happened without God intervening. And when that happened, which of course is step 2, then I started to think, well, maybe that's my way out of this. Maybe if I start to just welcome God into my heart instead of trying to work myself, trying to know Him, that's it. And I kid you not, within 2 or 3 days, I'm seeing doves and hearts in the clouds, and I am on fire. I have eliminated drinking. I'm not going to kill myself. I've found God. God dang it, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get out of there. And I had a ball. I had a blast. The stories were great. The people were great, as you guys know. Like, I finally felt like I fit in for the first time in my life. I could tell somebody that I tried to commit suicide and not get sent to the hospital on the spot. They were like, yeah, I did that too. And I was like, no kidding. And then you just talk about it. Like, how freeing is that? And I still experience that same thing in these rooms. That's why I'm probably not nervous right now, because I'm talking to people that understand this. But I got out, and Raymer said before we left, like, because at that point I was on the student council of La Hacienda, and I was getting elected to things, and I had all these friends. And Raymer said to several of us, and he looked at me and he said, like, life is going to smack you right in the ass when you get out of here. And I thought, not me. I quit drinking, and the obsession was gone. At that point, the obsession was gone. I'd still think, like, what are my friends doing on Friday night? The obsession was gone, and I couldn't have driven past the convenience store prior to that without getting beer at all. So I get out, I get home, the girl and I patch things up because we were together before, so technically I was going to ignore this rule about not dating for a year. So we get back together, and I realized pretty quickly, within a month or two, that Chris Raymer was right and that life was going to kick me in the butt, because it wasn't alcohol that was the problem in the first place. The alcohol was a symptom of my sickness. And my sickness was that I was so in my own self-pity and so damn selfish that all I ever thought about was me. And I continue to do that. I continue to do that girl. That was the only thing that's making me feel better at that point. You take booze away from somebody that's 100% reliant on it, and you're going to find something else to put that into. And I, at the time, kind of laughed at the guys that were like gym rats at rehab, and I thought, that won't happen to me. Well, it did. It happened before, and it happened after. So at that point, I had gotten a sponsor, a guy I knew, attorney in town, that had been sober 10 years, but he'd never had a sponsor. And he was pretty isolated, as y'all can probably relate to in this town. We've got us. But when we walk out those doors, sometimes we're, few and far between. And so I think he was more interested in having a friend, a buddy at that point. We never talked about the steps at all. And as my life started to get worse, and I started to feel sicker and sicker, even than I did when I was drinking. And I don't say that to scare anybody. I think it's important to say, because I became more depressed, more anxious, white-knuckling, without alcohol there to kind of push that out of my mind for at least, 3 or 4 hours every night, than I've ever been in my life. And I knew that if I kept doing what I was doing, which was attending meetings and trying to get... It took me, by the way, a year and a half to realize that Brian V was saying osmosis on purpose. I don't know if y'all ever heard me say osmosis, and I'd say, oh, dude, no, it's osmosis. But I was doing that. I'd sit in meetings. I was going to Sherwood at the time, and then I would talk to Todd, and Todd would give me advice on girls and whatnot. And the girl and I at that time were breaking up, about as unstable as you could possibly get in early recovery. And it was obviously making things worse, but it was also the only thing that was making me feel any better. So I was right where I had been with alcohol, where I didn't know how to live with it, and I didn't know how to live without it. So things were getting pretty bleak at the time. My last sponsor, was not a fan of that relationship, and I thought, I got to do something. Like, I texted Gabe at one point. Gabe kind of said the same thing. then I started coming in here because my anxiety was through the roof. In my office, I have a couch, and I'd get through meetings, and then I'd go and I'd lay on that couch because I was so sick and so miserable and so scared of everything and everybody. And I had not done anything in the prior 40 years of my life to try and cope with emotions. And I was raised in West Texas, and you're not supposed to have them. You're supposed to be stoic, and by God I was. If I had a bottle of scotch in me, I was damn stoic. So I'm struggling, and I come into a meeting and I talk to Gabe, and I said, I've done the steps. I don't think I did them right. I saw Kenny at something else, and I kind of pulled him aside. And I said, Chris Raymer actually gave me your phone number when I was in rehab, and I never called you. I wish I would have, because I'm 6 months sober and I'm freaking miserable. And he said, well, you need to start working with people. So I get with Gabe. Gabe walks me through the steps. But this time, and I had done a step 4 before, and for the first time in my life, I realized I was mad at people. That's how out of my mind I was. I couldn't even grasp that I was resentful at people. And I did it, and that's what I got out of it the first time, because I wasn't doing it correctly. It's like, I'm mad at people. How liberating to know that it's because I'm mad at people. I wasn't looking at my part and all that at all. So when Gabe and I started working the steps and going through it, it's one of the things that I really focused on is, what is my part in this? How am I responsible for this? My part in it. And yes, I have been wronged by people, but did I step on their toes to deserve it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Every time. Absolutely. So I start also at the time believing wholeheartedly in the fact that you could pray some of that stuff away, because it worked. People I'd been mad at for years. I would talk to Gabe about it. I'd journal about it, do a step 4 about it, and I'd pray it away, and I'd give it to God, and the next morning I would wake up and feel lighter. Yeah. It was amazing to me. I almost got addicted to that. Almost got addicted to doing step 4s. And then it came to the amends, and Gabe helped me with that. And for me, I was real fortunate. My family, they were just so glad to have me back and not dead. That they forgave me pretty early on, even though they probably shouldn't have. But what they wouldn't have forgiven is if I hadn't gotten back into it. And I'll kind of touch on this in a second. And really worked the program and gotten well. I don't think they'd ever forgiven me if I'd have stayed white knuckling as long as I did and not put some more effort into this program, because they wanted me back. They wanted the real me back. So we did that, and there's just things about the program. It's so simple yet so hard to do, but there's just things. I cracked a joke about being born and raised in West Texas and being taught you need to be stoic. It never occurred to me at the end of each night to sit down and write if I was scared, to write down if I was resentful at someone, if I'd lied. I'd lied for years, never thought twice about it. Now if I tell a white lie, I feel like, the gates of hell are opening up and being swallowed whole. And it's kind of amazing how that works. But I'd never processed any of that stuff. I've never done any of that. 40 years old, I've had a successful career, but I've never done that. I've never worked on myself. And it was only through this. And what's funny is, I made a joke about the doctors too. Like, I had doctors and psychiatrists and counselors and everybody else throw medicine at me and everything that they could think of, and nothing worked for the alcohol. Nothing worked for the alcohol except true surrender and except turning my will over to God. And it took me a while to figure out what that actually meant. I just thought at first I just thought, well, you just got to believe in God and that's good enough. No, you're selfish, John Austin. And you need to turn your will over, because the decisions you've been making have been awful. And they've led you to this place where you almost killed yourself. Where you were driving around drunk with your kids, where you were about to get fired, where you were about to lose your kids. And it was only through turning my will over to God that I was actually able to do that. But about that time also, through Gabe's help, was able to start sponsoring people. And I believe it's maybe originally from Jerry, but when I did the steps myself, I understood very little about it. I understood what I knew in my own little consciousness, in my own little brain. When I started dealing with someone else, I started helping somebody else see the errors of their ways and see where maybe their thinking, could be a little bit different. all of a sudden it cracked wide open for me, and I started to get it. And I really started to understand it. And then we also, about that time, started going to GRC and taking meetings there. It's not a coincidence, guys, that 6 months ago I was still thinking about trying to kill myself, and today it's the furthest thing from my mind. And it is only because of this program. This thing that I avoided like the plague, that I told my parents I didn't want to go to a rehab that was all about AA, that I don't want to go to a 12-step program, that it didn't work. This is the only thing that's saved my life. It's serious. And the fact that it cured not cured, but the fact that it helped me stop drinking to boot is amazing. But what I'm really here to attest to is the fact that I am, for the first time in my life, not irritable, discontent, and agitated all the damn time. Now, I still get agitated because I still got to deal with life. And hard stuff still comes up. And, I've made countless errors with that same damn girl. Ask Gabe. I kept going back. And sometimes, at least for me, a girl's harder to quit than alcohol ever was. The bottle of scotch does not text me at 2 a.m. saying, "You up?" Yes. But you know what I did with that situation? Went back to the program. Realized I was powerless. And I'm still not over it, but I'm better. I can't stand here before you today and say that I'm fixed. Certainly never will be. But I can tell you that the obsession to drink alcohol is gone. The obsession to text that girl back is gone. And again, I could have done that on my own. So if I have any parting words of advice, it's stick with it. Just don't quit. It gets hard. I'm unabashedly, I'm sitting here telling you, I had some of the darkest days of my life sober. And I did not anticipate that when I was skipping through rehab, making friends. But if you've done this your whole life, and I believe most of us have, it takes a lot of unlearning. And you know how you do it? Steps written on the wall. So I'm here, grateful, blessed, privileged to get to talk to y'all about it. Privileged to get some of that off my chest. Hopefully some of that helps you. I'm probably a little heavy on the suicide stuff, but somebody in here needed to hear it, I know. Because I did. Don't quit. Don't quit. Don't just because you're feeling that way and you felt that way for months, don't think that the choice, the only alternative is to go get more alcohol and go back to the way you're living. That's a choice, all right, but I can guarantee you where it get me, and I know that. So you lean into the program, you call your sponsor, you work with sponsees. I mean, for goodness sakes, if you need to, call a doctor. I mean, there's things that they can help with. They can't help you quit drinking, I promise you that. I still have doctors to this day that will say, "You really hadn't drank in a year and a half? Surely you could have, I don't know, a couple of Christmas or something." I'm like, not me. Not me. But don't quit. Just keep working at it. Keep turning over leaves. Quit. If you don't have the sponsor that works with your personality for the first time, go find one who does. Come to meetings. It's not about me when I come to meetings anymore. It's about maybe having something to offer to other people, but it's also about the community of recovering alcoholics. Because I don't get this anywhere else. I don't get the feeling of being surrounded by people that understand exactly what I went through. My parents don't. That girl certainly didn't. My brother doesn't. We all do. And there's huge importance on being able to rely on your family, as Gabe said. And so, thank y'all for sitting here and listening to me and letting me tell that story. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. And thanks, Kenny. Thanks, Gabe. Appreciate y'all.